So today I'm going to talk about the origin of mathematical zero, where it came from, how it came to be, how it evolved from simply a placeholder into what we know as mathematical zero today. So let's just jump right into it here. So understanding mathematical zero. So the term zero actually came from an Arabic word sifr, which actually came from a Sanskrit word shunya. And shunya, as a lot of Indians recognize philosophically, means sort of empty or void. Um, and so if we want to consider zero to be this mathematical quantity that sort of represents nothing, then this idea has been present in actually many other cultures. The ancient Egyptians, for example, represented such a zero word with a word that's spelled NFR, ufr. I probably said that wrong, but you know. It's important to understand that mathematical zero and the philosophical understanding of nothingness, they are related, but they're not entirely the same. Um, so, you know, we think of zero as there's obviously nothing present, but we can still work with zero. We can still use zero to manipulate things and do stuff with it. Whereas this, like, if there's nothing, you know, there's nothing to be done, right? So, um, so biblically, we understand nothingness as that which sort of preceded the creation of the world that we know, which is really kind of a hard concept to grab. Like if we take a look at Genesis 1:2, and the earth was without form and void. So obviously that's before God sort of got on his horse and made this place that we live in now. And it's really interesting because, at least for me, I have no frame of reference for this understanding of nothingness, you know, like what came before everything here. Like, because I and we really never experienced true nothingness. Another example where we see this is in Job 38:4, when God's actually speaking to Job. He says, "Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? You know, tell me if you understand." Um, and so that's, you know, just an interesting way to think about it, something to really consider, something to ponder on as we sort of go through and talk about this. And so next we'll talk about some general history of zero. So the first evidence of the concept of zero actually comes from Sumerian culture in Mesopotamia about 5,000 years or so ago. If you take a look at the bottom, I've generously provided some symbols for zero here. So again, the Sumerians just use this slanted double wedge. The Babylonian symbol is a bit similar, but there's obviously some additions to it. The Mayans completely different, but we'll get there when we get there. Again, I do want to reinforce that there was no official zero symbol, because the idea hadn't really come to fruition yet. This idea of zero wasn't really mathematical. It was more of a placeholder, just for the concept of nothing. And then this idea made its way to Babylonians, and then to the Mayans. And from there, it made its way to the Indians from the Greeks, who really didn't use zero until sort of the end of their tenure, I guess. And then the Romans, in fact, had no trace of zero at all, really. So the closest zero to this Indian zero that we're going to talk about in a little bit was the zero of the Mayans, represented by that eye-like symbol, because they developed it out of the need to sort of represent large numbers. But again, you couldn't do anything with it. It was simply just a placeholder. The only civilization which, again, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the only civilization which didn't make much use of zero were the Greeks, who were mostly inclined toward geometry. So that kind of makes a little bit of sense if you think about it. The Greeks, again, weren't very arithmetically inclined, as they thought it to be associated with the relation of equality and therefore an activity for the slaves. Moving on here, Arab merchants actually brought zero. They found in India to the west, and after, you know, some opposition, some back and forth, the ancient Chinese developed this open circle zero that we sort of widely accept today. There really was no use of zero before the Hindus in India, except as a placeholder in numbers, which was independently developed by the Babylonians and the Mayans. So we take a look at the different variations of zero. Again, we mentioned that the Greeks didn't really use zero. It didn't show up until late, and occasionally it showed up. It was not very popular. So yeah, moving on here, we're gonna begin to talk about sort of this Hindu development of zero. So we'll start with this ancient Indian scroll called the Bakhshali manuscript, which was carbon dated to the 3rd and the 4th century, and it actually shows this placeholder dot. This placeholder dot here at the bottom. It actually has that, and so that's considered to be the earliest sort of recorded occurrence of zero. Fast forward a few hundred years, we've got two ancient Hindu astronomers and mathematicians, Aryabhata, who was born in 476 AD, and Brahmagupta, who was born in 598 AD. They're both very popularly believed to have been the first to sort of formally describe this modern system of the use of the zero symbol. So Aryabhata, around 520 AD, was actually the first to formally describe the modern decimal place value system, and then also present rules governing the use of the zero symbol. So here we are, we can see this sort of transgression from simply placeholder into operational, usable zero. Brahmagupta, around 650 AD, used the double dots below numbers as a placeholder for zero, while developing sort of rules around getting zero with addition, with subtraction, with multiplication. And so again, you see this evolution of we're coming from zero just being this zero in numbers that we use as a placeholder to now we can actually use and manipulate zero. Another cool thing I just wanted to point out was this Chhatrabhuj temple inside a Gwalior fort. Gwalior is a city in India. So this 8th to 9th century temple has the inscription atop one of the towers. This is ground zero for zero, which I think is a really cool quote. And I know that Indian culture, especially the Hindus of India, are very proud of like the development of zero. I mean, it's an astronomical discovery. I mean, we take it for granted, but it really is such an incredible discovery. And for them to be able to grasp this concept of nothingness and then apply in mathematics just demonstrates the sort of tie between philosophy, religion, mathematics. I mean, it all goes hand in hand. So moving on here a little bit, I just want to talk about sort of that other side, this philosophical, this religious side of zero. And so at the time, Indians, especially the Hindus and Buddhists of India, were really, open to this concept of nothingness, which was not super popular in that time. Indians were already philosophically open to this concept of nothingness. I mean, think yoga was created to encourage meditation and this emptying of the mind. Hinduism and Buddhism teach extensively about embracing nothingness and just examining this peaceful state of being and how to achieve this peaceful state of being. There's two really popular texts in Hindu and Buddhist religion. Oh gosh, I'm probably gonna mess this up. The Bhagavad Gita and the Buddha Vakana. I probably said those wrong, but so those are two manuscripts that speak extensively about this idea of nothingness, this peaceful state. And then again, we think about yoga and meditation, which originated in this culture, and how it pushes this idea of, let's empty our mind, let's be in this state of nothingness. And so I guess in some ways they sort of had a head start. And then there's a project going on today. There's a guy by the name of Dr. Peter Gobetz in the Zero Ridge India Foundation, or the Zero Project for short. And I'm going to read this quote to you. He says, "Mathematical zero may have arisen from the contemporaneous philosophy of emptiness of shunyata, which is a Buddhist doctrine of emptying one's mind from impressions and thought." So again, just analyzing this sort of idea of, nothingness and emptiness in ancient Indian philosophy and religion. Did anyone else think of this first? Well, there's a lot of things. For one, it was really unpopular and it was just incomprehensible. I mean, it was hard to sort of understand this idea of nothing and then also develop rules around nothing and how we can use nothing to make something. It just wasn't a very widely held popular belief. And there really wasn't a need for it. Like I said, if we think about Greek mathematics, how geometrically inclined they were, I mean, you didn't really need zero in that context, and they really didn't use it until very late, and even still, um, there was a pretty negative view of nothingness, especially within early Christianity. Um, for example, within the early days of Christianity in Europe, when religious leaders sort of banned the use of zero, because they felt that since God is in everything, a symbol that represented nothing must be heresy. It can't exist. It doesn't make sense. Um, and so instead of exploring that idea, we just immediately shut it down. And so those are some reasons why the Hindus of India may have been the first to achieve this. If we want to briefly talk about some examples of its use today, and I'd love for you guys to put in the discussion, what other uses of zero that you see, whether in mathematics or not. If we think about differentiation, finding critical points with derivatives, finding points of inflection with double derivatives, right? If we think about this idea of the binary system too, 1 versus 0, which has done so much and advanced our technology, our society so much. I'm pretty sure everybody in here is, I'm sure, worked with binary. And so those are two pretty popular uses. I'm curious to see what other uses you guys can think of in the comments down below. I think there's a discussion area. So yeah, okay, cool. We're excited. Thanks for sort of hanging out with me and learning about zero. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'd be happy to answer them for sure. All right, bye everybody.